So thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank the TZC, or where I'm originally from, TZC, and the other organizations that have invited me to come and share. Oh, look at that, amazing stuff. And share some of my thoughts at this extremely strange and challenging time in Jewish history and in Israeli history. So originally I came to tell you about REGAVIM, what we do, how we do it, but from the time I got on the plane until the time I got off the plane, so many things have kind of exploded into the news stream. I'm going to try very, very hard not to get too sidetracked, because every single thing that we can discuss this evening deserves really a whole semester-long course. But I'm going to try to give you a little bit of an overview of how I come to stand in front of people and tell them things, what makes me think that I know anything. And I think that that comes from how we do at REGAVIM what we do, and that gives us a very particular perspective. So we'll start from the beginning. REGAVIM was founded in 2006 in the very dark days of essentially lawfare against the state of Israel by what is sometimes called NGOs, non-government organizations, sometimes it's called non-profits. The most accurate way of describing the organizations to which we try to provide a contra is really an acronym that we made up, which is FOGOs. It's Foreign Government Organizations. These are organizations that are funded by foreign governments, although there is a law in Israel requiring that they report and make it transparent. This is an unenforced law, and that is a very serious problem. But we'll get to that a little further in. But in 2006, organizations that you have certainly heard of, including Peace Now and CILR, were using Israeli courts and Israeli law to dismantle Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, and to generally undermine the underpinnings of Zionist public policy. Starting from Judea and Samaria, but really certainly not ending there. And three young men came from very different parts of Israeli society. They had never met before, but each of them saw the same problems, the same challenges to Israel's Zionist public policy from different perspectives, and were brought together by a fourth person who said, you're all belly aching about the same problem, work together and try to solve it. So one of those people is much more famous today than the others. And one of those people, the famous one, is the reason why last time I was in Canada, for example, there were demonstrators outside. And when I go to England, I'm essentially blacklisted, and there are days of rage announced against my appearance. And many, many very good Zionist Jews who are duped by what they read in the newspapers object to REGAVIM because this particular person was one of the co-founders. His name is Smotrich. He is the Minister of Finance and a minister in the Ministry of Defense, responsible for Judea and Samaria today. He has not been affiliated with REGAVIM as long as I've been there, and I've been there 7 years. But he was one of the co-founders, and he has made statements that get various people extremely upset. So what I'm here to tell you this evening has absolutely nothing to do with Smotrich or any of his work today. We have very, very little contact with him in general because as Minister of Finance, he deals on a daily basis with things that have nothing to do with the issues that we address. Sometimes tangentially, perhaps I'll show you one example this evening, but leave Smotrich out of the conversation for this evening. The other two people were and are. One of them is our current Director General, Mayor Deutsch, who is now in his 8th month of active military reserve duty. He's a high-ranking officer, as are all of the male members of the REGAVIM team. On October 7th, everyone disappeared, and we began to call ourselves, instead of REGAVIM, Regavot, the female form because that's all that was left in the organization, and we kind of held down the fort doing what we do while all the men were drafted, and most of them still are, or are once again. But we'll get back to that. So what is REGAVIM? REGAVIM is a think tank and lobbying group that addresses the policy level of Israel's current and future use of its most basic resource. What is the most basic resource a country has? The land itself. Without land, you don't have a country. You may have a people, which we have had for 3,000 years, but without land, you don't have a country. So the policy that dictates how land resources are used is essentially the most basic expression, really, of a nation's sovereignty. Because if you make the decision who uses the land for what purposes, you're essentially exercising sovereignty in its only non-theoretical sense. Right? Everything else about sovereignty is a theoretical thing. But the decision about who uses that most basic resource, how they use it, for what purposes, and what the ramifications are for the future of your country, that is sovereignty. And we began to understand, or the three young men who came together in 2006 began to understand that Zionism was essentially seeping out of Israel's public policy, particularly in terms of its land use policy. We see the same problem, they saw the same problem, and we still see the same problem over every inch of the state of Israel. So REGAVIM is active on every single inch of the state of Israel, but in a very literal sense, because what we do is examine how every inch of territory is used, how it's used, by whom, for what purposes, and what that means for the bigger picture. So we're very, very active, for example, in the Galilee, in the Negev, in Jerusalem now. For the first time, we've become fully engaged. I'll get back to that later. And as well in Judea and Samaria. I will preface pretty much everything else I'm going to say this evening by making the admission that yes, I am a Zionist. And what that means is that I believe that the Jewish people have a right to a nation state in the land of Israel. And that means that there should be no places in the land of Israel that it is forbidden for a Jew to live on the basis of being a Jew. So that puts me outside the pale of conversation in some places. Anyone who doesn't agree with that statement, I apologize in advance, but I'm not going to back down from it. But that has certain ramifications for land use policy and for, unfortunately, our relationship with other governments and other government-funded organizations. So, how do we do this? How do we monitor land use policy, and to what ends? I'm going to try to maneuver this. Yes. So, this is the mission statement, essentially in one sentence of what I've just spent 5 minutes telling you. And that is that we use research, fieldwork-based research, and archival research, and legal research to examine land use, and we carry those, we choose exemplar cases of misuse of those resources that have an impact on the nation's future, and we take that through the entire bureaucratic process and up into the courts, and on a regular basis, we sue the government of Israel for failing to do its job to protect our national resource and our national interest. We try not to get to that position, to that end of the line situation, but unfortunately that's in many, many cases the only way to highlight problems and to force the government to take note that it's not doing its job, or to force the entire public sector in Israel to understand when there are lacunae in the law, when there are black holes, when the law is insufficient to protect our national interests or is counterproductive for a variety of reasons. So, because we're involved in field work throughout the land of Israel and looking at land resources, we got involved as, let's say, ancillary fields in a lot of other areas that are impacted by these same problems. For example, we're very, very active in the environmental protection sphere. We have a whole branch of REGAVIM called Green Now that examines all sorts of environmental protection issues that don't respect political borders and therefore are subject to political constructs and things fall between the cracks. So for example, if someone is burning toxic waste in Area B, an area controlled by the Palestinian Authority, it's still going to be strangling people living in Little Israel, in Israel proper, and in Area C, and in Area A. The pollution doesn't respect borders, but the political constructs that have been created don't address those problems. That's one aspect. Another aspect is archaeology. We became very, very involved in trying to protect threatened or some much even worse than that, archaeological sites throughout the land of Israel. This may be news to some of you, but there is a concerted effort on the part of the Palestinian Authority and its supporters to physically erase Jewish history from the land of Israel. So archaeological sites have been decimated all through the land of Israel, and the government of Israel, for a variety of reasons, has failed to address that problem. We've forced them to do it, and we have quite a lot of success to report on that, but I'll get back to it. But all of these issues arise from our work out in the field, and many other issues arise because we address these issues on a policy level and on a legal level. That got us involved in issues of judicial bias, legislative reform, and judicial reform, all of these things as outgrowths of what we were finding in real time from the ground up. So, maybe? Yes. This is how we do our work. Some of these are older pictures. We have quite a lot of new ones as well. But we go out into the field, we compare maps of that show what should be there, and notice when something is there that shouldn't be there. We document it, we photograph it, we take very precise measurements. We use drones connected to the GIS system, Geographic Information System, that puts precise satellite coordinates on every single structure in the entire country. And then we take all of that information back. We check archives, we check aerial photos dating back to the beginning of photography, more or less. We have pictures that the German Luftwaffe took in World War I of many of these areas to compare exactly who was using every single piece of land and for what purposes and by what rights. So we take all this information, all these photographs, all these aerial photos, all these archival things, and all the legal documents that we can get our hands on, which is another problem for another day. And then we analyze them, create maps, and then we do something very unusual. We look at the map and we connect the dots. Take a step back. It's like one of those connect the dots pictures that you did when you were a kid, numbers 1 to 50, and then when you take a step back, you look at it and you see you've got Mickey Mouse, right? So Mickey Mouse in our case is, we begin to see trends of illegal use of the land resources. We begin to see areas of concentration of land abuse, environmental abuse, archaeological abuse. We begin to see areas in which the political lines have been redrawn simply by the creation of facts on the ground illegally. So when you connect all the dots and take a step back, you begin to talk on a policy level, and that's where we aim. So, some of the examples of some of the areas in which we're extremely active. These are pictures from the north of Israel. Massive, those structures that you see over there are massive villas built inside the Carmel Nature Reserve. They're illegal, they're built on state land, in a no construction zone. They are not only polluting and dangerous and tax-free and everything else, they're also obstructing the access to a national park and nature reserve to all the rest of us, because somebody just decided that that was a great place to build his family compound, and did so. So we go to court, and we petition, and we force the government to actually take enforcement action, knock it down, and restore access and restore the nature reserve to its former state. We map out in areas where there's widespread illegal construction and no enforcement, and try to understand why that is and what the solutions are. We also, at the same time, that's a little bit cut off, but one of our most impactful reports, this is going back already almost 5 years, was the first of its kind environmental impact report about all the junkyards that you will see along the roads up in the north of the country. The government of Israel at a certain point was even running a program for scrapping old cars that are highly polluting and dangerous. So it was doing this trade-in thing. If you brought your car to a garage, one of their licensed garages, you got a credit for taking an old and dangerous car off the road, and the government would give you a credit so you could get a new, less polluting and more safe car. The problem was that the government of Israel, on its official website for this scrapping project, was allowing people to use illegal, unlicensed, substandard garages that were not treating all of the wastes properly, that were not treating the effluents properly, that were burning the tires to get rid of them rather than paying to have them properly disposed of. And all these things caused such massive pollution in the north of Israel, where most of our water supply is, that wells had to be shut down by the Ministry of Health over and over and over again, because all of these things were seeping into the ground, were polluting the soil, polluting the groundwater, polluting all of our streams, and destroying all of the natural resources in an area where much of our food is grown and where many of our people live. So that was a groundbreaking report. We've since done quite a few more. We are also very, very, some people think of us as the negative people because we are the only organization in Israel, really, that examines Israel's policies in the Negev. This is a massive subject, one that I can, to address properly and explain the massive problems of land use policy in the Negev, we need a few hours, which we don't have this evening, or certainly I don't have. But we discovered, for example, and we forced the government to face the fact that its land regulation policy in the Negev has caused a massive disaster, a massive loss of governance, and a massive loss of land resources. It has encouraged the practice of polygamy, which is against the law, and has created a demographic and social and political time bomb, which is now exploding on us in the Negev, and has done all of this simply out of fear of alienating Bedouin citizens of Israel, who are no longer required to actually to obey Israeli law or to adjudicate in Israeli courts. Where is this thing here? Someone's phone is speaking. Okay, so I brought along a few examples of some of our reports. All of these things are available on our website, which is a very, very worthwhile resource. Okay, so all of these reports are available in full form on our website. Anyone who wants a printed copy, I will leave my card, contact me and I'll have them sent to you. But we are recognized by the government of Israel, essentially, as the experts in the Negev. We take members of Knesset, ministers, out to the Negev and teach them, because pretty much no one knows what's going on there anymore. These are some of our cases, our more famous cases in Jerusalem. This year, for the first time, we hired a full-time field coordinator to do what we do everywhere else in the country, exclusively in Jerusalem. This is an all-new project. We're creating a 5-year plan, course of legislative and policy action to address the massive, massive loss to the state of Israel of its own capital. I'm not sure how much you are aware of what's going on in Jerusalem, but the Turkish government has pretty much taken over, I would say, a quarter of East Jerusalem. UNRWA is running rampant and inciting the local community. We have massive, massive problems in Jerusalem of foreign bodies and hostile concerns that have radicalized the community in Jerusalem and are essentially taking over. There are massive no-go zones, no enforcement zones, Arab neighborhoods that are inside municipal Jerusalem that are now controlled by the Palestinian Authority and are bases of terror. We are losing Jerusalem. So REGAVIM was asked by the other organizations that have been active in Jerusalem for years to please come in and apply our system, really, our entire system of collecting information, analyzing the information, suggesting policy, and reforming that policy, and when necessary, suing the government in order to force it to do its job in Jerusalem itself. In this case, for example, we actually sued the government because of the United Nations and UNRWA's behavior in the capital, and we won. And 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, the government of Israel notified UNRWA, which is a terrorist organization being funded by your government, that it was no longer welcome in Jerusalem and would have to vacate all premises on state land in Jerusalem and pay back taxes, which it has not paid in years, amounting to millions. UNRWA is a serious problem. The United Nations, for example, has invested tens of millions of dollars a year, in some years much more than that, tens of millions of dollars a year for the Palestinianization of Jerusalem, and that is what the plans are called. The government of Israel makes believe it's not happening, but it's happening. So we're trying to put a stop to all that. This is back to the Negev. My slides are out of order, I apologize. This is just some of our more recent reports on the Negev. This one up here, the Stable Care Initiative, if you want to understand how we propose solving the massive problems in the Negev. This project of legislative forward-thinking policy, step by step, how to untangle the massive tangle of social, demographic, and political issues surrounding land regulation in the Negev and the resolution of Bedouin land claims in the Negev was presented and taught to the government, and 85% of this plan now constitutes the government's 5-year plan for the Negev. The only minister in this government, when this government was sworn in, there was only one person who not only agreed, but volunteered to take the portfolio of the Negev, is a man called Amichai Shikli. I don't know if you're aware. He is now in the Likud, and he's minister as well of the diaspora affairs, but he also holds the Negev portfolio. The only reason that he felt that he could take on this massive problem is because he spent a year and a half with REGAVIM, learning from us exactly what the problems are, how they were created, and how to solve them. And so he took this Stable Care Initiative plan. This is one page of it. And this is the map of how to resettle the Bedouin squatters who are swallowing up state land all over the Negev. And so all of this is actually being implemented by the government of Israel now, so we're very optimistic that there will be changes. There already are changes. There was very, very serious enforcement recently. For the first time ever, a squatters camp, 50 structures were actually demolished by the government of Israel after almost 10 years of negotiation that led nowhere. The government actually knocked down a squatters camp that was blocking the further development of Route 6, the Trans-Israel Highway. And this is a very, very serious precedent, which we hope will transform law enforcement and Bedouin resettlement in the Negev. So, anyone who's interested in all of that subject, it's all on our website. I'm not going to give you this history lesson this evening, even though it never hurts to remind ourselves. But when we start to talk about our work in Judea and Samaria, some history is necessary. And this is just a brief reminder. The map that you see here, in the two sections there, were all the mandate for the Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. Over 75%, somewhere around 75%, of the land was chopped off illegally by the British in order to appease the Hashemites, and Jordan was created. So Israel was left to contend with this, the map of the first two-state solution. Remember that when someone says, well, what about a two-state solution? So we tried it once, and we tried it twice, and we tried it 3 times, and 4 times. And each time it has brought worse and worse results. The map you're looking at here is the map created by the Oslo Accords, and this is international law. Essentially, this is the current international legal regime that is in force, and this is the regime under which we operate, and the yellow areas that you see on the map are the areas known as Area C under full Israeli jurisdiction. That is where REGAVIM focuses when we work in Judea and Samaria. We have nothing to do with areas A and B, which are under Palestinian Authority control, but Area C under Israeli jurisdiction is where we demand that the State of Israel uphold the law and protect our national interests. We have other things to say about the day after, or the day before, or the day during, and that is irrelevant. But the law states that the State of Israel has to uphold the law and protect the land resources and the lives and liberties of all the people living in that yellow area. That area was set aside for Israeli jurisdiction, as opposed to the red areas, red and maroon, which were set aside for Palestinian self-rule, for the very simple reason that less than 5% of the Arab population of Judea and Samaria was located in those areas. 95% or more of the Arabs of the West Bank, quote unquote, should have nothing whatsoever to do with the State of Israel, because they were living in areas that were handed over for autonomy to them. And all of those areas are where they're supposed to be building their future. Instead, since 2009, they have poured all of their resources into taking over Area C, the area under Israeli jurisdiction, through essentially 2 methods. One is illegal construction, and this map is not coming out clear enough for you to see it, so I'll show you another map in a moment. And the other is through the use of, these are some of the examples of that illegal construction. If you look carefully, you will see these symbols on the sides of all of these structures. Those are European Union symbols. The European Union not only encourages the Palestinian Authority to break the law, it actually assists the Palestinian Authority in breaking the law. And I can show you right now hundreds, literally hundreds of pictures of illegal structures with European Union symbols on the side. It's not an oversight that they didn't take these things off. Quite the opposite. This is what gives these structures diplomatic clout. This is what makes the State of Israel afraid to tear them down, even though they are clearly illegal and they are clearly a threat to Israel's governance and security. That didn't work out well.
Why the European Union? Why not the UN?
The UN, well, first of all, let's go back. Something strange happening with my slides. Let's see if I can get this to work. Where is it? Picture didn't come out. Okay. Why the EU and not the UN? In Israel, there's no difference between them. They are one and the same.
Wait, conceptually, but I mean, the EU is like...
No, not just conceptually, technically, physically. In Israel, the EU and the UN is the same thing. They work together. Yeah, so there are some projects that are UN projects, and there are some projects that are EU projects, but they all come from the same pocket, essentially.
I'm sorry, and what is that pocket? What is it that gives them the legitimacy, the boldness to do this? Like legally? I understand the idea that's behind it, but legally...
Why do they think they can get away with it? Because they can. Because they have. Because they are. What will stop them? If we decide that, we will stop them. Israel has to be ready and willing to face the pressure from a very, very large group of very, very powerful European countries all at the same time. So far, that has not been an issue. I can tell you, I'll give you an example. One of our most famous cases that will illustrate all this, but I first want to just show you, explain what this map is. What you see here is a map. Those green dots are all quote-unquote villages. In these green dots, in many of these green dots, over 80% of the structures that make up these outposts have EU symbols on the side, which means that these villages were invented, funded, created, and are supported and protected by the European Union, and every one of them is illegal, and that's just the green dots. And there are hundreds more that we did not locate specific symbols of the EU on the side, but in these, 80% of the structures have those EU stickers on the sides of the buildings. In many of them, there are very, very few people, but the structures are there, and that's what an outpost is all about. It is a declaration of control and creeping annexation. What you'll also notice from this map is that they're not haphazard, and they are not coincidental. Look at Jerusalem and see how, this is an old map actually, it's much, much worse now, but these outposts are placed in strategic places, and they're placed, I'm going to show you here, if I can. So this is Jerusalem. See these concentrations here? They're there to build a land bridge. This is Jordan. This is the Jordan Valley, right? These are meant to create land bridges between blocks of Palestinian Authority-controlled territory and Jordan. So all of this illegal activity, the illegal construction, and all these outposts are at least as much of a threat to the state of Jordan as they are to the state of Israel.
Why don't you call them settlements?
They're not settlements.
Everything that is a settlement is a derogatory way.
No. First of all, they're not settlements because they're not settled. The people who are living in them have houses, generally have homes elsewhere. They are outposts. Many of these structures are empty, and many of them are uninhabitable, really. They're there simply as placeholders. So they're not settlements.
So what you just said right now, you made a very important point there, security threat, and obviously they're preparing for nuclear war. I don't mind it though.
Please someone does. Okay. Yes. So.
The point you just raised, that's
Mhm.
a very important point. Security threat and it's preparation for future war. How is it that the state of the government at least can't see that?
That's a very good question. REGAVIM is the only organization that I know of that prays to become redundant, and the sooner the better. If the government were doing its job and were facing these threats instead of sweeping them under the rug or pushing them, kicking the can down the road for somebody else to deal with, we wouldn't exist. But we do, unfortunately. And we have a very hard uphill battle to convince the government of Israel to open its eyes, to admit that what is happening, and that the ramifications are as we say. Unfortunately, but extremely unfortunately, things that we have been saying for 18 years all came home to roost on October the 7th. And I will show you exactly what that looks like on the map very shortly. We're sort of leading up to that. Another tactic, one more second. Another tactic that the Palestinian Authority uses to great advantage to take over the territory of Area C is illegal agricultural projects. Now, this is all based on Ottoman land law, which is still in force in Judea and Samaria. As you know, in 1967, when Israel took back this territory, instead of declaring what any normal country would have declared, that this was always Israel and had been occupied for 19 years illegally by Jordan and was now once again part of Israel, and therefore extend Israeli law to these territories, it said, let's negotiate so that everyone will love us. We're still waiting for that. But we'll negotiate, so we'll hold the situation in abeyance and we'll make believe for certain aspects that this is an occupied territory, that the people here are living under occupation, not the territory itself. It's an extremely subtle differentiation, has tremendous ramifications, but the bottom line is, Ottoman land law is still upheld and applied by Israeli courts in Judea and Samaria. And one of the clauses of Ottoman land law that was created to encourage people to do something constructive with this wasteland that no one wanted, and this wasteland in which it was illegal for Jews to set foot, one of the clauses was that if you use a piece of territory for agricultural purposes for a certain amount of time and no one objects, it no longer can be considered the Sultan's land, it's no longer state land, and you get certain rights to it. Not full-out ownership, but usage rights. The Palestinian Authority is very, very well aware of this clause, and so uses agricultural projects all through Judea and Samaria, right up to the back fences of Jewish communities, including sometimes inside the municipal lines of Jewish communities, all along the roads, in between Jewish communities in order to cut them off from one another, and take over property rights simply by planting trees. Not even trees. Sometimes they plant shrubs. They plant mustard seed, for example, and grapes. Those things are extremely fast growing and indigenous, so it looks like they've been there for a very long time, but they haven't. The Supreme Court of the State of Israel, adding insult to injury, determined that only Arabs can benefit from that clause of Ottoman land law. So if a Jew goes out and plants in Judea and Samaria, nothing. You get no rights, and it remains state land, and it is uprooted immediately. So those are the two main tactics that the Palestinian Authority is using to take over Area C. As I mentioned earlier, expunging the record of Jewish history in Judea and Samaria, and none of my pictures are coming out. Some of my pictures are coming out. So one of their favorite tactics is to build schools. The Europeans love to provide education to underprivileged children. They build schools, all illegally, in Area C. And this is one of my favorites here, but not the only one, because if you look carefully, this one is right up the block from where I live. At Shmuel Hanavi, Kever Shmuel Hanavi, they've built 2 schools up there, not one. You can't see this one, which is a shame, because at Susia, on an archaeological site, they built not 1, not 2, but 3 schools. This is Malach Heber, can't see this. This one was just demolished thanks to our petition. At the Herodian website, the city built by King Herod and where he is buried, they, in the middle of an archaeological site and nature reserve, built an illegal school. We had it torn down. This one is very famous, Khirbet Zanuta. Read the B'Tselem reports and the US government's sanctions of Israelis, and you will see Khirbet Zanuta over and over and over again. This is also an archaeological site. The fascinating thing is, I don't know if you can see it in this picture, sorry, go back again. But in the background there, you see there's buildings. That is the municipal offices of the South Hebron municipality. So this illegal, quote-unquote, village was built on an archaeological site, on a highway, back-to-back almost, with municipal Israeli, legal Israeli municipal buildings, and just after the outbreak of October 7th, Khirbet Zanuta became very, very famous because the people living here picked themselves up and went back where they came from. Exactly your point, Paul. They all owned homes in Daharia, but they were here because the Palestinian Authority was paying them to stay here, to take over this important piece of land. When the war broke out, they said, the Israelis may get serious about actually enforcing the law because Israel was afraid. And this is really what I wanted to talk about this evening, but haven't even got there yet, is that the scenario of October 7th on the Gaza border was meant to be, it was essentially a failure, even though it was a horrific success on their side. It was a failure because what the plan was to do the exact same thing all along the entire Green Line at the same time. And in order to head that off, the IDF sent massive forces into Judea and Samaria to protect the Jewish communities from being overrun. So the people at Khirbet Zanuta said, well, the Israelis are going to get serious and they're going to destroy all our stuff and send us packing, finally enforcing the law. So they packed up all their stuff and went back where they came from, inside Palestinian Authority-controlled Daharia. And then B'Tselem jumped on this and said, oh, settler violence. They were chased out. They were afraid that the violent settlers would come and attack them. And this has been the narrative, and this has been the basis for U.S. government sanctions against Israelis who live in the area, and it is, plain and simple, a blood libel. I will be discussing this blood libel on Sunday morning. You are all welcome to find out details about where that is, because I have no idea. But I will be discussing that this exact issue in greater depth, the whole settler violence narrative, where it comes from and where it's going. So, this, by the way, is a map. It's very, very hard to see on the screen. You can look at it for yourself on our website. We tracked over 100 illegal schools, all through Judea and Samaria, which is a favorite tactic of the Europeans and the Palestinians. This is just some of the pictures, I don't know how clearly you can see it, of the destruction. This is destruction by the Palestinian Authority of the largest necropolis in the Middle East, the graves of the priestly families, the Hashmonaim, at the Hasmonean burial grounds just outside Jericho. They came with bulldozers, they threw all the sarcophagi out, they ran over all the bones with tractors. We discovered it. We had special civil administration and army detail cover us. We went in, we collected what we could, and we had all of the remains reinterred in Mitzpeh Richo. Kfar Adumim, at the cemetery in Kfar Adumim, and a special commemorative plaque was placed there, but this is going on all over Yehuda and Shomron, at Sebastia, which is Shomron, the seat of Jewish monarchy 2,500 years ago, and they're doing it all over the place, and not all the slides are shown. Once the war broke out, we shifted a little bit, and I'm going to leave you with this small video clip. It's 2.5 minutes long. Then I'll take questions. There's much more to say, but this will give you just a taste of what we began to do since October 7th, and I'll explain it in 2 ways. One of them is this. And this report was presented to the government after the outbreak of October 7th war. We simply took our existing maps and isolated the illegal structures all along what was supposed to be a sterile buffer zone, the entire length of the Green Line, that would have given the IDF reaction time if the same thing happened along the Green Line that happened along the Gaza border. So when Oslo divided up the territory and gave the Palestinian Authority an armed police force, it also said, if things go wrong, we need time to react. So there will be a sterile zone, no construction, that will allow the IDF to come in and push back against any invasion from Palestinian Authority-controlled areas. In the interim, there are over 20,000 illegal Arab structures in that buffer zone. It's not a buffer zone anymore. It's a launching pad for terrorism. And it is threatening not only all of the seaborne communities, not the communities in Judea and Samaria, but inside Israel proper, and all of Israel, particularly in the areas, and you'll notice it yourselves, these areas of concentration where Israel's borders are the narrowest. We're talking about 9 miles wide, and it is full of illegal Arab structures, and they're not there by coincidence. So we did this analysis to try to highlight the dangers that had already been exhibited on October 7th for the rest of our borders with the Palestinian Authority, because there is no difference between the Gaza border and the rest of it. And we also did something else. When the government of the United States and other countries began to talk about the day after the war and empowering the Palestinian Authority to take over in Gaza and in a Palestinian state in the heart of the land of Israel, we applied the same methods that we apply to our fieldwork to the question of Palestinian Authority. I'm trying to get this to the beginning. I'm having a problem. Yeah. So we created this little video clip, and it is essentially an explanation of this report. Palestinian Authority has a police force, which is armed, funded, trained by the United States and a consortium of other governments. Your government is right in there. And they train them supposedly to protect Israel from terrorism and to prevent terrorism. Instead, they have, since the first day of their existence, used the arms, the weapons, the training, and the money to kill us. And it hasn't stopped, and it's actually taken on greater momentum since, in the past 3 years. So, I'm trying to,
On October 7th, we met Hamas's terrorists face to face. A deadly wake-up call. Now, let's meet the Palestinian Authority's terrorists. The Palestinian Authority security forces were established by the Oslo Accords and are supported and trained by the US and European countries. For years, people have been saying that the Palestinian Authority fights terrorism, that it's a partner for peace.
הרשות הפלסטינית בעת הזאת פועלת על מנת לרסן טרור. אם נגיע למצב שהם יפעלו נגדנו, אין מה לעשות, ואנחנו לא במצב הזה.
But what do the Palestinian Authority's security forces have to say about that?
كحركة فتح وأيضا كأجهزة أمن منذ 30 عام. الأمن الفلسطيني قدم أكثر من 2000 شهيد.
Let's not fool ourselves. The PA incites terrorism, the PA funds terrorism, and the PA commits terrorism. We all know that the PA pays terrorists who murder Jews. But it doesn't end there. Not even close. The PA security forces, our partners, are involved in every aspect of terrorism and are very proud of it. A new report by the REGAVIM movement exposes the real numbers. The official Fatah Martyrs proclamations boast about dozens of PA officers who were killed while committing acts of terrorism in the last 3 years. Add to that dozens of Palestinian Authority terrorists in uniform who were arrested for planning and executing other attacks. We emphasize, these are people who work in the Palestinian security forces. At the same time, they carried out terror attacks. And these are only those who were caught. The figures do not include perpetrators of terror attacks who have not been arrested, and the thousands of supporters of terrorism among PA employees. This shouldn't surprise anyone. Many of the PA security officers are released terrorists, including those with Jewish blood on their hands. These terrorist officers are honored in military funerals and are heroes and role models in the Palestinian education system. Public buildings and streets are named after them, and their families receive official support and prestige. So, you tell us, does the Palestinian Authority really fight terror? Have we really woken up?
So, we applied our methods in an all-new research division that we started this past year. We have an Arabic world research division. Scans all of the Arabic language, social media and traditional media, and collected and presented to the government, in their own words, the testimonials by Palestinian Authority officials in support of Hamas and the massacres of October 7th. The government stood up and took notice and has finally begun to push back, and as a direct result, made unequivocal statements about the non-starter idea of placing the Palestinian Authority in charge of Gaza on the day after the war. We are working very, very hard on this. We continue to supply the government with information. The government itself did not have any response to the Americans at the time. Clearly, it's easier for us, being not the government, to shout back at the Americans than the government itself. It has other things on its mind, including armaments, including supplies and trade and all sorts of other things. But we will not allow the government to buckle on key issues such as these. This is just some of the areas in which we are involved. As I said, I brought up just a small sample because I had a baggage allowance of some of our more recent reports. Everything is on our website. It's very easy to find. It's regavim.org, I recommend you look at the website to learn more about any of these issues, and I'll be happy to answer a few questions.
Whose fault was it, the IDF or the government? Was that political?
Whose fault was what?
All those illegal
Always.
settlements, all the green dots all the way around.
It's a combination of things.
So Naomi, sorry, just if you can repeat the question.
So the question was, whose fault is it? All these failures that I've described this evening, whose fault is it?
Who was responsible?
Who's responsible for that, we know. That's the government of Israel. And that's why we exist, and that's why all of our activity is focused on the government of Israel. The government of Israel is not only responsible, but is the strongest player on this board, right? So we don't sue the Palestinian Authority, and we don't sue individual construction violators, and we don't sue foreign governments usually, sometimes we do, but we sue the government of Israel because...
Do you get them when you sue?
Pardon me?
What do you get from them when you sue? Do you get money or you want...
Oh, no, we don't get money. Sometimes we get, the court will require them to pay like in any other case, that it requires the loser to pay the court fees for the winner, all our legal fees. But every time we take a case to the Supreme Court, which means every single time there's a case having to do with Judea and Samaria, it costs us somewhere in the area of $35,000. All of our funding is from individual private donors. We have no foundational support, we have no government support, we are not funded by foreign organizations of any kind. So we choose our cases in order to create precedent. We choose cases that illustrate a much larger problem, and we choose cases that will force the government to respond to an entire phenomenon. But who's responsible? Who created all of this? It's the government of Israel closing its eyes in the face of massive international pressure, which is why, aside from all of our legal and policy work, it is important for us to educate the public, because what creates that international pressure is the ability of our governments to mislead people who are paying for all of this. The more people know, the more people understand what is happening, the more people understand what the legal parameters are, the more people are able to identify truth from falsehood in the news reports that they read, the less pressure your government and other governments will be able to exert on the state of Israel.
But isn't the idea of someone's responsible for the security of this seat, and then don't they have to report that? It's not...
The government of Israel is responsible to democracy. The army doesn't operate by itself, or shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So there's a policy involved, and that's the level at which we try to impact these things.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, obviously, and everybody here knows Spotrip and Ben Gvir, which are associated partly with the organization.
No, they're not. That's totally false.
Well, they're seen in a very negative light in Western media, right-wing extremists.
For some reason, then it's a completely justified image.
And on what I watch a lot of Y2014, English service from this, also painfully similarly. So I'm wondering if you're fighting an uphill battle. And
Of course we are.
I'm wondering if, with all the international pressure and momentum for two-state, magic solution like a mantra, that I'm not agreeing with it, but that ultimately, inevitably, that's where things are going to end. Maybe in 20 years, 50 years, I don't know. And that it's inevitable. So,
Nothing's inevitable except for death and taxes. That's
No,
what they
that's
taught
very
me.
serious.
I'm completely serious.
Like a rear
Nothing
guard
is
losing
inevitable.
action.
I'll tell you something else. Ask me, do you believe in a two-state solution? And I will say you're asking the wrong question. When did it become etched in stone that there's only, that it's a binary question? It's either war or statehood. There are political resolutions to problems like this all over the world that work and don't end in independent statehood. And what we don't need is another failed state. The state that is being proposed for the Palestinians is automatically 100% guaranteed to be another failed Islamic state. Who needs that? The people living there don't need that either. So the question that you're asking is the wrong question. The question shouldn't be Palestinian state or not Palestinian state. The question should be what normal, sensible, logical, political resolutions can be achieved to enable the people living on both sides of this conflict to live peacefully and have a better future. And there are many possibilities, but there's only one requirement for any of them to work. And that is that you have to have both sides interested in achieving peaceful coexistence. Until you have that, and I say this unfortunately with increasing I'm very tired. More and more often in recent weeks, and this is what I say over and over, Israel is the world's leading expert in negotiating with itself. Because that's all we've been doing. We have been making these incredible scenarios, plans, resolutions, all of these things, but we're talking to ourselves. There's nobody on the other side talking to us. And until you give me 50 years without a shot fired at a Jew in the land of Israel, I can't talk to you about giving more power to the people who are trying to kill us. When you have two sides that are interested in resolving this issue peacefully, anything is possible. It doesn't have to be statehood, it could be autonomous zones, it could be provinces, it could be all sorts of things. It could be local rule, it could be confederation or federation with Jordan. It could be, there are at least a dozen different political resolutions. All of them require only one thing, and that is an honest desire to live peacefully. So far we don't see. So then, in other words, until we see that desire exists on the other side, we have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to my children and my grandchildren not to play games with their lives, not to endanger them and take a chance that the other side suddenly will be what they haven't been in 100 years, and that is interested in allowing me to live as a Jew in the land of Israel.
So,
Can I ask a question?
Hold on. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say, for them, thinking that it's for them, it's a means to an end. It's a means to an end, and their end is too high. But my question was, do you talk about strategy with the government? Do you talk to them about planning some of these?
Yes.
And you make recommendations of
Yes.
strategy. And the second question is, do you look at as well foreign ownership or control of like ports, for example, like Haifa or like other foreign entities kind of coming in?
It's not an area that we've been involved in. There are others who are involved in that very, very, very intensively. It's not us. We limit our efforts to the question of land use policy. If you look on our website, we have two major policy papers that we're working on. Now, they're not just policy papers. They are blueprints for how to solve in an organic way and how to plan for the future. One of them is called the Stable Care Initiative is negative 2050. We're looking ahead 25 years, how to get to a normal place one step after another. So look at the plan and you'll see exactly what has to be done first, what has to be done second, what has to be done third in order to arrive at a place where we can do what has to be done, all the following steps, and what those steps are. We talk about it in tremendous detail, and the same is true for what we call the Line in the Sand project, which is the exact same approach to Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, because they're all sprinkled everywhere. You can't control it. It's too
So,
it needs to be.
look, when we began to look at the question of polygamy, for example, we came to it through the prism of land use. We began to understand that more and more and more and more illegal structures, houses were coming up on the ground all over the Negev. We began to ask, who's living there? And we began to learn about the Bedouin population of the Negev. It is the fastest growing population on planet Earth. It doubles in size every 12.5 years. That is unheard of in human history. It's massive. How is that happening? And we began to ask these very, very simple questions, and we began to understand that the government of Israel has essentially created a situation that is encouraging the illegal, immoral practice of polygamy. It is somehow or other has become the world's greatest propagator of human trafficking because of this, and is essentially doing all of this at the expense of the Israeli taxpayer. It is stunting our entire economy, but what's worse is that it is relegating women and children in the Negev to unbearable poverty, backwardness, alienation. It's a life of misery. They're living off the grid because they have no choice, because they're illegal. And the state of Israel is not only allowing this to happen, it's encouraging it. Not on purpose, but because of misplaced policies, failed policies. So once we began to see that, we began to understand how intricately involved all of the problems are. You start with land use policy, you end up with social policy, you end up with terrorism, education. Then we got involved in trying to understand how the Israeli courts and the Israeli National Health and National Insurance got involved in all of this. It's extremely complex. When we brought these problems to the government, they said, it's too big, it's too much, we don't know where to start. How do you unravel this knot? So we sat down, and it took years to begin to understand in what order the steps had to be taken. Because you can't just do it all at once, and you can't solve it with a boom. It's not something that can be nuked out of existence. And there are people on the other end. So we had a very carefully constructed program. You can read it on our website. It's called Stable Care Mission.
What's the
Could I
Regavim.org.
just add one little quick point in there that Mary probably missed? That I believe the detail that she said at the beginning is the Israeli government policy that when a Bedouin turns 18, he gets a plot of land given to him. So because of that, that's what triggered all the polygamy, having lots and lots and lots of children, because that way you can amass lots and lots and lots of land. So that's, I'm sorry to explain what I was talking about.
But also, Naomi, maybe you can mention that these are all Palestinian women that teach
Not all.
jihad.
Not all of them are Palestinian
But
women.
they radicalize.
Some of it is even worse than that. I don't know if you follow the news closely enough. A few months ago, after the outbreak of the war, Ismail Hania's sister was arrested. Ismail Hania's sister is one of several of Ismail Hania's sisters, Ismail Hania being the head of Hamas. His sister is married to an Israeli Bedouin, has Israeli citizens, her children, and now grandchildren, and she's running a Hamas branch from an Israeli Bedouin town in the Negev. So they finally went in and arrested her. Now, this is just one small example of what's going on down there. Aside from everything else, we have a massive problem of there's a whole culture of lawlessness because the state of Israel did not want to enforce the law and be accused of racism or social appropriation or whatever. So the Bedouins say, well, this is our culture, polygamy is our culture. Polygamy is against the law in the state of Israel, and it has been since Israel was founded. When the Yemenite Jews came over on the magic carpet in the early 1950s, some of them were polygamous as well. And that was their culture. And the second they stepped onto the tarmac, they were told, this is not going to continue. And it disappeared, never to be heard of again, because Israel enforced the law. And that is what we expect Israel to do. Not only because it is a huge political problem and a social problem and an economic problem. We don't want to live in the Wild West. We don't want to live in a backward country. We don't want to live in a country where women are bought and sold because they are a huge lever for economic gain. This is not something we want. We also don't want women who are no longer useful to their Bedouin husbands to be left in the situations that they're in, abused in the way that they're in, have nowhere to turn because they are not registered, they're not legal. They can't go back where they came from, and they can't stay where they are. We're creating a massive problem by being afraid to enforce the law equally and universally. One more, Daniel.
Yeah, is there a problem of women being used because they can come in as non-citizens, be used to foster or to parent, like be the mothers of now Israeli citizen children, so that they can basically be brought in for free? They're brought in from the Palestinian territories. They're non-citizens. They're brought in as like almost like cattle to create Israeli citizen Arabs, who then, as we discussed, like become landowners.
Yes. So the answer is yes. And the problem is a tremendous problem. The problem is a combination of Israel's non-enforcement at its own borders, non-registration, and not wanting to confront this issue and be accused of racism. So, the hospital in the Negev, Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, sees it all. It also, by the way, among the medical staff of Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, has the highest suicide rate in Israel. The medical staff there deal with things that would set your hair on end. But if you look at the computer system in Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, you will see that there are actually miraculous things in the Bedouin society. For example, the same woman can have 5 births in a year. How is that possible? She's not. The same Teudat Zehut, the same ID card, had 5 children in a year. That means that the man, the father of these 5 children, had 5 wives, and every time one of them came to the hospital, he used the one legal ID card. And the medical staff in Soroka Hospital have a very, very clear policy and directive. Don't ask, don't tell. Because they don't want to discourage women from coming to the hospital to have their babies, because then you have infant mortality, maternal mortality, birth defects, you have all sorts of other problems. We don't want that either. So they don't ask, even though they know that this woman's ID card had 4 or 5 other babies this year, and it's not physically possible that this is the same woman. But don't ask, don't tell. There's only one problem. When you go into a hospital to have a baby, sometimes things go wrong. And if you need an infusion, if you need a blood unit, and you get the blood type of the person whose ID card you're using, and it's not your blood type, you can die from that. And Israel's Soroka Hospital has massive problems with this. And all of these babies, every one of them, when they turn 18, is given half a dunum plot of land, $250,000 shekel, full development of the land. Yes. Hold on. No, that's what I'm paying. One of the highest tax rates in the world for. Your money's going for other things. Anyway, before that, remember that all of these women are now recognized as single mothers because their marriages aren't registered anywhere. So they get benefits from the state of Israel as single parents. Their children get extra benefits because they are single parent families. And all these single, quote-unquote, unwed mothers in the most traditional society in the world continue to have babies every year with these men. They're clearly married, and everyone knows it, so the national insurance in Israel created a whole new category, and they call these extended families. Mishpacha murchevet. It doesn't really exist, but they can't say polygamous families, because that's illegal. And they can't not give them these benefits, or you will have starvation, you will have malnutrition, you will have all sorts of developmental problems. So, instead of trying to solve it afterwards, enforce the law. Don't let these people come in with underage women from Judea and Samaria, who are their wives, and create a system where the national insurance goes out to check who exactly is receiving the checks, who's living where, with whom. All of this can be solved, but you have to know where to start unraveling. we can't go on any further. I encourage you all to come on Sunday morning. We'll talk about other issues. All of them are infuriating. I'm sorry I'm such a bummer. But I want to just close with one thought. And it's the thought that keeps us going in REGAVIM all the time. And that is, some of these problems are massive and they look insurmountable. But when you remember one simple fact, you are encouraged, because these are not God-given problems. We created these problems, and that means we can solve them. So I encourage you to follow REGAVIM, sign up for our press releases, newsletters, keep yourself informed. You can reach out to me anytime with specific questions or topics or issues or whatever, and help us solve